Hey everyone, welcome to Snatching Joy, the election 2020 edition. And could there be a better day to look into God's Word and see what it has to say about joy than today? And I don't know about the rest of you, but even before I came up here, I was watching the polls coming in and the numbers in the states, and it's so easy to let our hearts be gripped by concern or fear or stress. And tonight we're going to look at joy, because it is that joy that is a safeguard for our heart. Now, I want to thank all of you who took the time tonight to step away from those polls and to look into God's Word. And my prayer is that you're going to walk away rejuvenated and with enough joy to overflow to the rest of your family who may be feeling that stress and anxiety. Because regardless of the outcome of today's election, the reality of our joy remains exactly the same, whether the side we want to win wins or whether the other side wins. Everything stays the same as far as our joy, because remember, it is based on the character of God, found in the promises of God, and is the gift to us at salvation because of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Now, like I said, regardless of the outcome of the election, our joy is still valid. Regardless of the fear that we may feel over what we may lose, whether it's freedoms or the ability to worship in the way we want to, the reality of our joy is still firmly rooted in the promises of God. And regardless of what we think our country may look like tomorrow or next week or even 4 years from now, the reality of our joy is still based on God's character, not on what happens in the affairs of men. So we can build our faith on that foundation of trust and belief in the joy that God has given us. Now let's review, as we always do, a little bit from last week's lesson. For us to follow God's word in obedience that produces joy, we have to understand God's word. It's impossible to follow something we don't understand. And honestly, there's a real danger in following what we don't understand. That's how cults get started. People follow something that seems attractive or that they get sucked into, but they don't understand the depths of the depravity of it, and they get swept along. So there's a danger in following what we don't understand. So understanding for the believer begins when we dive into the Word of God personally, when we study it. And now study is not the amount of time spent, but it is the depth of study. And so for you young moms who have little ones and you're thinking, how do I fit study into my day? God has a special grace for you. And I'm going to encourage you just to carve out 15 minutes if you can, to spend time digging deeply into God's word. The benefit that you'll receive is greater than any nap or time doing something else that's enjoyable could ever be. God can minister to your heart in that time. So we begin by studying. And again, we talked about ways to study to go a little deeper. And I asked you, as you signed in tonight, to share if there were any obediences of understanding that you added this week. So did you do any of the things we talked about last week, like getting a study Bible or beginning to compare translations? You know, what does this translation say? What does this one say? Why the difference? Getting a concordance or learning how to Google what you're looking for. Reading the surrounding verses so that you get the immediate context, and then looking at what you're studying in the bigger context of Scripture. Not looking for moral rules for living, but looking for the story of the Savior and following His model for obedience and transformation. Looking for other verses that address what you're studying. And finally, the big, most important step in understanding Scripture is putting it into action. Understanding is incomplete unless it involves putting it into spiritual action. So that's number one thing that we talked about last week. Now, the second thing we talked about is the fact that God sees our acts of spirit-led obedience. Other people may not see them, or they may see them and never acknowledge them, never say thank you, never tell us we're the greatest mom ever, right? But God sees them, He recognizes them, and according to His word, which we looked at last week, He blesses us for those acts of obedience. Even the tiniest act of obedience is rewarded by our God. We talked last week about the difference between eager obedience and willing obedience. And you can go back in the book and look and read the difference between the two. Now, it's really excuse me, can you tell I'm tired? It's really easy with our children to see the difference between eager obedience and willing obedience. In fact, as moms, we kind of judge that all day. Are they obeying me eagerly? Are they dragging their feet, rolling their eyes, huffing? We're looking at their obedience to see how they do it. Well, no one else really is going to talk to us about how we obey the Lord. So it's important to self-examine. Are you an eagerly obedient follower of Christ? Or are you just willing? If God really makes it painful enough, you'll do it. Or are you perhaps simply disobedient? You don't obey anyway. It doesn't matter what the Holy Spirit convicts you of. It doesn't matter how clearly you see the need for change. You're kind of like our 2-year-olds who put their hands on their hips and say, you're not the boss of me, right? Are you eager? Are you willing? Or are you just plain disobedient? The next thing that we learn, and this is from Proverbs 12:20, we learn that counselors of joy will receive joy. And remember, we said that's a little bit counterintuitive because it would seem like counselors of joy bring joy, but the word says that they receive joy. We get joy as we counsel and bring God's word into the lives of others. And the more we understand the word of God, the more available and the more equipped we'll be to offer that counsel and encouragement that others need. And then finally, we talked about the obedience of trusting God. Trust is not an emotion. We treat it as though it's an emotion, but it's actually an action. And obedience and trust go hand in hand. So we can't trust without obeying. And our obedience comes from a place of trusting God. They go hand in hand. All right, that's our review. Now let's move on to chapter 8. Now, I really love the quote by Elizabeth Elliot that starts this chapter. Think about what she says about our obedience. He, and she's talking about Jesus Christ, offers an exchange, his life for ours. He showed us what he meant by giving himself. The overwhelming fact of the Son's obedience to the Father, hell itself harrowed by the infinite majesty, does it not call us far out of ourselves, far beyond the pitiful, calculating, cowardly, self-serving, self-saving pursuit of what the world calls happiness? And I'm ashamed to think how often that's me. He, again, talking about Jesus, offers us love, acceptance, forgiveness, a weight of glory, and fullness of joy. Is it so hard to offer back the gifts that came in the first place from the wounded hands, body, mind, place, time, possessions, work, and feelings? Is there anything that we won't offer back to the Lord in obedience for what he has done for us? And when we offer it back, what he promises to us is a weight of glory and overflowing joy. Now, remember from the beginning of the study, we talked about the fact that our joy is ours, that we can take ownership of our joy. It's given to us as a gift, and then we own it. Now, when we own something, we have the freedom to do something with it. So today we had an example of this. Steve bought me a beautiful pair of boots in Paris probably 8 years ago, and I wore them for 5 years, and I love them, but they just aren't very comfortable anymore. And so I passed them on to my daughter, Emma. Now, Steve can teasingly boo-boo face and make me feel bad, but the truth is I own the boots and I can pass them on if I want to. That's how our joy is. We own it. It's ours. We possess it. But part of the responsibility that goes with owning joy is protecting our joy through growing in wisdom. If we don't grow in wisdom, our joy is going to be vulnerable to the enemy. It's going to be vulnerable to laziness. It's going to be vulnerable to us missing that it even exists. The unwise believer takes their joy for granted. They don't steward it. They don't take care of it. They don't protect it. They're haphazard with their joy, pursuing happiness at the expense of biblical joy. And now you remember we said that the pursuit of happiness, there's nothing wrong with the pursuit of happiness as long as it's within the parameters of God's word. We have the freedom to pursue happiness. But when we forsake joy, which comes from obedience to the Lord, for the sake of pursuing happiness that goes outside the boundaries of the Word of God, we're not protecting that joy that we were given as a gift, but that now we own. So how do we protect our joy through wisdom? Well, first of all is this. We have to recognize that it's not available to the lost. When we try to share our joy with the lost, with them not knowing the Lord, we can't do that. We can't spill out joy to people who don't know the Lord. Joy is a gift to the saved. The second is recognizing how the unsaved can affect our joy. Turn with me to Proverbs 15:21. Proverbs 15:21. Flip there real quickly. Says this, folly is joy to him who lacks sense, but a man of understanding walks straight. So we want to be those men of understanding that have studied the Word of God, that understand the obedience of understanding. But this verse tells us that folly is joy to him who lacks sense. To the unsaved, their folly brings them what they believe is joy, but it's a counterfeit joy. It's not biblical joy. It's not the joy that is the gift of the Lord. And when we follow along with them in that folly of joy, we won't experience biblical joy either. Becoming wise helps us to recognize worldly folly that we allowed to cloud our joy sometimes. There are things of the world that simply cloud the joy that is ours because of the gift that God has given us. When we protect our joy through wisdom, we protect our joy through wisdom as we actively pursue that wisdom. We're going to look at Psalm 16:11. I'll give you a minute to get there. And we've looked at this verse before because there's a lot contained in it that fits different areas of joy. But Psalm 16:11 says this, thou wilt make known to me the path of life. In thy presence is fullness of joy. In thy right hand there is joy. There are pleasures forever. As we seek wisdom, we gain wisdom that we need to walk this life. We need God's wisdom to know, do I go here? Do I choose this? Do I engage myself in this? Do I align myself with this group of people? We can't do that on our own and bring glory to God. We need the wisdom of God to do that. That wisdom, according to this verse, allows us to rest in the presence of God and in the fullness of His joy. Now, in a very practical way, we're helped as we seek joy by time in the Word, by prayer, by purposely placing ourselves somewhere that we receive sound teaching. And that's so important. I didn't say purposely placing ourselves where we're comfortable or where most of our friends go to church or where the music is really neat or where our kids like the youth group. If we want to gain the wisdom that protects our joy, we need to place ourselves somewhere that we're purposefully under sound biblical teaching. And then, as Proverbs 13:20 says, we protect our joy through wisdom by carefully choosing wise friendships. Proverbs 13:20 says, he who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. We can know with no doubt that when we choose to surround ourselves with fools, we will suffer harm. No friendship is neutral. Either you will influence your friend or you will be influenced by your friend. So, ladies, don't slip foolishly backwards by surrounding yourself with foolish friendships, with people who pursue folly and find joy in that. We need to be wise in our friendships. So here's a question for contemplation. What is the bulk of your friend time? How do you spend the majority of your friend time? Now, you might think that I'm going to say you need to spend it in prayer and in, serving together to gather things for the missionaries. That's not what I'm saying. But is your friendship time an iron sharpens iron type of friendship where it's a biblically focused friendship, or is it a fun-focused friendship? There's really 4 types of friendships that we engage in. The first is evangelistic. Those are our unsaved family members and friends that we invest in relationship with them because we want to earn the right and build a bridge to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. We intend to be the influencer in that relationship. The second type of friendship is acquaintances. We all have a lot of acquaintances. Steve and I travel to conferences all over the country, and there's certain people that we bump into every time that we we engage in pleasantries with. How's the conference season going? How was the trip here? Are you refreshed by the teaching that you're hearing? And at the end of the conference, we're all like, who can pack up the quickest and get out of here, right? Those are acquaintances that we have light friendships with. And then you have real friends, people that you perhaps share experience with. As we travel to those conferences, there are some couples that we would consider friends. And the more time we spend with them, the more our friendship with them grows. But they're not necessarily those iron sharpens iron relationships. We talk about events still. We engage in activities together more so than we do with acquaintances. But what we really need is what the scripture calls true fellowship. We need those relationships. And fellowship is defined, I think we've talked about this before, as two or more people moving in the same direction with a common goal. That's right out of Webster's dictionary. So it's not a Christian definition, but when we put it into a Christian context, this is what it looks like. Two or more believers moving in the same direction with a common goal. I have lots of Christian acquaintances and I have a lot of Christian friends, but I have very few Christians with whom I have that true fellowship, that iron sharpens iron relationship that pushes me towards my convictions, even if they don't share them, holds me to the standards I've set, encourages me when I'm discouraged, reminds me of my joy when I need it, prays for me when I need prayer. We need those relationships. We need that type of fellowship if we're going to walk in wisdom, because as we walk in wisdom, we protect our joy. So the next area of obedience we're going to talk about is one that I think we believe we practice, but I'm not sure we understand the full extent of its importance. Worship is an act of obedience. Worship is not a feeling or an emotion or prickly, our skin feeling all prickly and our heart being moved. Worship must be founded in biblical truth, and then it will produce biblical joy. Now we're going to turn to Psalm 100 and read through the entire psalm, because this psalm gives us very careful, very precise directions for worship. So turn to Psalm 100. And again, I'm reading out of the New American Standard Version. This is what I use as my study Bible. And if you can, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but it's incredibly marked up. Psalm 100 says this: "Shout joyfully to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful singing. Know that the Lord himself is God. It is he who has made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him, bless his name. For the Lord is good, his loving kindness is everlasting, and his faithfulness to all generations." This psalm guides us into how we can have joy-producing worship. First of all, it tells us that we come with joyful songs and shouts. And I think it's interesting that he starts with that. And I wonder if the psalmist was thinking of the people of Israel and thinking, does what you're doing on the outside match your face, right? When we're doing our worship, does it match what's going on the inside of us? Does it show up on our face? Joyful songs and shouts are not something we put on. They're something that come from within, that is generated by the Holy Spirit and built up with growth in the Lord, understanding of the word, following and obedience. Worship flows out of obedience that has already taken place. Now recognize that joyful worship is based on knowledge and understanding that God is God. That's the second instruction in this psalm. It says this: know that the Lord himself is God. It is he who has made us and not we ourselves. So it's important in worship to recognize that God is God. He's not the God we want him to be. He's not God the needs meter. He's not God who just gives us provision, protection, gifts, answered prayer. We worship him because he is who he says he is. He is the great I am. The next instruction is this: recognize that God created us. We are not God. And so our worship that we generate ourselves does not bring honor to God and does not produce biblical joy. We have to recognize who we are. God is not in our image. We are made in the image of God. And we can't even picture what God is exactly like. We try to make him look like us, but he doesn't. The next thing is this, to recognize that God shepherds us. Worship flows out of a recognition that it is God who keeps us safe. It is God who shows us where to go. Now, in the second half of this psalm, it switches to joy that comes through thanksgiving. Worship that shows itself through thanksgiving is the natural overflow of a joyful heart. A joyful heart will overflow in thanksgiving. A non-joyful heart will overflow with grumbling and complaining and being a victim and being easily offended. There's a whole list that we teach on the reactive tree of what happens to a person who doesn't come with a thankful heart. Thankfulness for God's goodness, thankfulness for God's everlasting kindness. You see that in verse 4 and verse 5. Thankfulness for his faithfulness. Those things flow from a worshipful heart, and they produce joy. Joyful worship is like a trumpet. It sounds forth the truth about our God. Worship flows from us in response to the person and character of God. It's dangerous to try to own worship as something that is ours. Now, we can own joy as something that is ours, but worship is an area of obedience. It's obedience to God. We don't produce worship from ourselves, and we don't present worship as a gift that we made. Obedient and joyful worship is for God and from God. God is the one who produces the worship in us, and he does that as we understand his word, follow him in obedience, know that he's trustworthy, all the areas of obedience that we've studied. Now, worship isn't the only area of obedience that tempts us to take credit or look for self-focused praise. The last area we're going to look at tonight, and we actually are going to end a little early. This was a shorter chapter, but service offers the same temptation to us that worship does. Service gives us the opportunity. It tempts us to think just how neat we are. Look what I have to do for you, God. Aren't you lucky to have me? That's never what the obedience of service looks like. When we begin to think that we're really neat, there is no joy in service. There may be the praise of men, and there may be an earthly reward, but there's no spiritual reward, and there's no joy. There is no joy produced from self-serving service. Now, service is really a precious privilege. If we didn't have the ability to serve God, I think we would be wretched. I think we would be longing for ways to show God how grateful we are to him. So how do we serve? Well, do we serve only in the areas that are comfortable to us? Do we serve only according to the spiritual gifts that showed up on our spiritual gift tests? Do we serve when it's convenient or when it's up front? Is that what biblical service looks like? Well, I think you know the answer is no, but let's look at why. True joy-producing service, what does it look like? Well, first of all, it stretches us outside of our comfort zone. Many of you know me, and you know that if I had my choice, my service would always be to be in the kitchen. I love running kitchens. I love feeding people, especially teenage boys. I love organizing. I love running teams of other cooks, but that's not where God called me to be. He called me to speak, and he called me to write. That's outside my comfort zone, and the Lord and my husband have kicked me over that line enough times that I know I want to obey in that area. Think about the other people that God kicked over the line of their comfort zones. In Exodus 4:10 is the beginning of where Moses says to God, you can't want me. I can't speak. I'm not eloquent. I'm slow of tongue. And he begins to list all the reasons that he's not the man for the job. But Moses was who God had chosen to lead his people out of Egypt. The story of Noah begins in Genesis 5. Do you think he had a comfort zone he was kicked out of? Noah had never seen rain, and he for sure didn't know what an ark was. And God called him to build an ark, put the animals in it, live through the ridicule of his friends, convince his wife and children to go on the ark. Boy, that's some comfort zone breaking by the Lord. Think about Paul. Paul was called to go minister to the very people he had persecuted. God has no comfort zones for us, and true service doesn't just serve in areas that are comfortable. Service is no respecter of comfort zones. The next thing about true joy-producing service is this: it fills the need of the moment. Those who fill the need of the moment aren't too good for any job in the church. That means that they'll scrub toilets, or they'll pull weeds, or they'll work in the nursery. John 13:12-17 is when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Now, he didn't wash their feet so that we would wash everyone's feet, but he said he did it as an example for us. And the example was he who was the teacher, the rabbi of the group, was not too good to wash the dirty feet of the disciples. There's no job that is beneath a serving believer. And the jobs that we do that are lower than what we think we ought to do, those are really the jobs that produce joy. Just a side note for you moms, if your kids only want to do the upfront service, if they like playing special music or helping in the nursery or playing the piano for the offering, make sure they're scrubbing some toilets and doing dishes after the fellowship. We don't want to teach them that service is only up front when they aren't willing to do it behind the scenes. The next service that is joy producing is this: a servant of the Lord who wants joy in his life sacrifices his time. He sacrifices his time. Now, this one's a real test for me. Now, COVID has changed up things for Steve and I. This is the most we've been together in our entire marriage, because he was in the Navy and he deployed, or he went on detachments, and then he joined the airlines and he was gone for multiple days every week. And so it's been a change for us to be together so much. And I'm very used to kind of alone time to quietly have my thoughts and just putter in my brain. And so twice now during COVID, I guess 3 times now, because one was last week, Steve has had to go to Dallas because, surprise, surprise, his landing's expired since he hasn't done any flying. And I planned for that alone time. And I thought, well, I'm going to be alone, and I'm going to read this in my Bible, and I might go shopping for a little bit, and I'm going to watch this, and I'm going to have quiet that's just me, myself, and I. And every time God brought someone to me, someone who asked if we could get together because they were struggling, a child who needed me to babysit my grandchildren, a son who needed to talk to his mom. And the test for me was I going to do it eagerly or willingly? See how it all goes back to our obedience? Would I serve eagerly or willingly? And ladies, I'll tell you, God's still working on me. Sometimes I have to have that kick to remind me that my desire is to be an eager servant of God. In the scriptures, we see that in Luke 10:25-37. It's the story of the Good Samaritan, and the man who was robbed and beaten and laying by the side of the road. A priest walked by and couldn't sacrifice his time or be seen with that man. A Levite walked by, the religious people, and it was a Samaritan who didn't just stop and help him, but took him to an inn, left money so that he would be cared for. He sacrificed his time to serve the Lord. And then finally, the last joy-producing service is this: serving without looking for any recognition. Serving without looking for any recognition. Matthew 6:3 says this: don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. We can know the intention of our heart when we're either out loud saying to people, did you notice what I did? Look at me, I'm such a self-sacrificing person. Or when our heart is saying that, who's going to look at me? Did anyone notice? Service is to be as though our left hand doesn't know what our right hand is doing. When we can learn to discipline ourselves and to subdue our self-interest to that point, joy will flow from our service to the Lord. Service is a precious gift from God. Now, just as a reminder, service doesn't just bless us. Service takes our eyes off our own problems. Service gives us God's eyes to see needs, and then we get to be Jesus' hands and feet to fill those needs. And service is the antidote to self-pity. Who knows how things are going to go tomorrow? And there may be a great temptation to self-pity, but here's the problem. When we throw a pity party, nobody comes because they're all having their own pity party. Serve. Find a way to serve, and your eyes will be taken off yourself, and you can point others to Christ as you serve. Now, just some reminders to hold on to for this week. And like I said, we're going to end about 15 minutes early unless you have questions. First reminder is this: we are responsible for protecting the ownership of our joy wisely. We must protect it, we can't dilute it, and we shouldn't neglect it. Second is this: our friendship can directly influence our joy. So, are our friendships worldly? Do they tempt us to replace biblical joy with worldly happiness? Are they friendships that help us to own our joy responsibly? Are they friendships that allow us to share our joy? Remember, we can't share our joy with the unsaved. We can show them our joy, but we can't give them any of it. Joy is a gift from God at salvation. Joy is only for believers, and that should give us just another reason to point our unsaved friends to Christ, because you know what? They need joy, and they need the joy that comes as a result of their salvation. The next thing to remember is this: our worship is an act of obedience. When it's founded in biblical truth, it will produce biblical joy. It is for God, it's from God. We just obey when we worship. And finally, service is a precious gift. It allows us to show our gratitude to God. Let me finish with one quote from Elizabeth Elliot, and it was in the book, so hopefully you read it, but I think this is a good quote to end with. When it comes to our obedience and service and worship and what we do for the Lord, this is what she said: there is no such thing as Christian work. That is, there is no work in the world which is in and of itself Christian. Christian work is any kind of work, from cleaning a sewer to preaching a sermon, that is done by a Christian and offered to God. This means that nobody is excluded from serving God. It means that no work is beneath a Christian. It means there is no job in the world that needs to be boring or useless. A Christian finds fulfillment not in the particular kind of work he does, but in the way in which he works it. Work done for Christ all the time must be full-time Christian work. Ladies, this week might we serve our families with that attitude of obedience that will bring joy to our hearts. But as we learned in several weeks so far, when God fills our cup with joy, he does it in such an abundant way that it overflows to everyone around us, first in our home, then in our community, our churches, and our world. Be in prayer tonight. God's on the throne. He's in control. We can trust him. This has been Snatching Joy. Are there any questions for tonight?
We do have one question.
We have a question.
And I'm not sure my mic's working, so you might want to repeat the question.
Okay.
It's from Samantha, and she says, when dealing with children and chores, all right, do you think it would be better for us to say we're going to have fun doing this, or would it be better to say we are going to find joy while doing this?
So the question was from Samantha, when you're dealing with kids, is it better to say we're going to have fun doing the chores, or is it better to say we're going to have joy? I think it's two different things. So remember, we can pursue happiness. That's okay as long as it's within the bounds of God's word. But joy is the basis of why we obey, right? Joy flows from that obedience. So I would say to our kids, we're going to have fun doing this. Let's turn on some music. Let's see how quickly we can do it. We were real big for contests, like who got the cleanest room. And we would do things that were fun, because honestly, there are jobs that aren't fun. It's like that quote from Elizabeth Elliot said, you know, there's cleaning a sewer and preaching a sermon. Now, I think maybe sometimes preaching a sermon feels hard as it feels to clean a sewer. So sometimes things don't feel like fun. We can still have joy from them, but it's okay to have fun doing it. Honestly, the greatest memories are the memories of serving that you do as a family. My kids are grown now. The baby is 19 years old. But when everybody comes home and we're all together for a holiday, for Thanksgiving is our big one, the things that our kids share are, first of all, the things they thought they got away with that we didn't know about, that, quite frankly, we were just too tired to get up that day. But more often what they share is the serving that we did together as a family. They have memories of the joy, but they also have memories of the fun we had serving together. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think both go together. It isn't that happy or fun and joy are mutually exclusive. They can go together beautifully. And it is fun to serve the Lord. It really is. And out of that service, God produces joy. Well, I'm Megan. It's been great to be with you. We'll be back next Tuesday, regardless of what happens tonight. Until then, hold on to your joy, snatch it, cling to it tightly, and practice serving out of obedience for the Lord, and get ready for the joy He's going to bring into your life. Have a great week.